Hey everybody! Now, as anyone who's read my video descriptions will know, this is my machine. It is a 2018 MacBook with 32 gigs of DDR4 RAM, a Radeon Pro 4 gig graphics card, and a 6-core Intel i9 processor. And it serves me very, very well. I have done transcodes on this as a DIT. I have been an editor and an assistant on full projects on this, ranging from short films through to feature films, action heavy stuff, and it's handled it all quite well. The only time when I notice any kind of performance dips whatsoever is if I've got a heavy load working on Avid, transcodes, renders, that kind of thing, and I want to do something else at the same time. And that is where my 32 gigs of RAM sort of is pushed to the limit. Or in the event I'm having to do transcodes of raw material on set and start editing with it almost immediately. Then, I'm starting to push it to the brink of really what it's for and what it's capable of. But on Monday, I'm heading to New Zealand for my next gig, where I'm going to have to do all kinds of editing and prep work and transcoding on the spot and almost immediately, as well as having to do some stuff that I haven't done before. And sadly, I don't know if my trusty machine is quite up to the task. Just in the sense that I can't guarantee that it'll be able to keep up 100% of the time, which is kind of what I need on this job. So, enter this guy. My new machine. Yep, this is my new machine. This is the one that I'm going to be using for all my primary Avid work, as well as the Avid Assistant videos and whatever else, for the foreseeable future, probably for at least the next 5 years. I don't like to upgrade really any sooner than that. It is a 2023 M2 Max MacBook Pro, the 16-inch variant, and just like I did when I bought my trusty MacBook here in 2018, I've spec'd this one out as much as I possibly could when I ordered it. So here we have an M2 Max chip, which has 12 CPU cores, 38 GPU cores, and 96 gigs of unified memory. So the GPU and the main system share the same RAM, as opposed to having any VRAM for the graphics. And it's also got 2 terabytes of internal flash storage. Now, previously 1 terabyte has always been, more than enough for me, but I like to keep a local copy of my photos library, and I was running out of space there, while maintaining my rule of always having 20% of the drive free. And, I'll talk about all this in a good bit more detail throughout the video. The long and short of it is this is a substantial upgrade. It is significantly faster. And so far it's been able to handle just about everything that I've thrown at it, with relative ease. Transcodes, exports, renders, all of that has been significantly faster on the new machine, up to 2 or 3 or 4 times as fast in some instances. And that even includes the internal storage. The flash storage in this one is twice as fast, allowing just insane boot up times and launching of applications. And the previous MacBook that I have over here was no slouch whatsoever. Now, I don't really want to spend this whole video talking about numbers and benchmarks and specs. I'll have links to that kind of thing in the video description if you want to go check that out. There's a link to a spreadsheet where I've done all that benchmarking. And there's lots of other videos on YouTube that have already reviewed Apple Silicon to its extent. No, surprise, surprise, in this video, I'm more looking to cover its performance with Avid Media Composer at its time, how I think it might get better soon. But with all that being said, let's just take a quick overview of the tech specs and I/O and everything of both machines, just to give you, an idea of the upgrade. So starting over here in the 2018 model, this was actually from a weird era of Apple laptops. It comes from a time where they were kind of ditching some of their best ports and their best I/O, like the MagSafe connector, which is one of the best, innovations that Apple's ever come out with. For those of you unaware, MagSafe is a magnetic charging connector, which Apple introduced way back when. I remember my first MacBook, I think, was a 2010 model, and it had it. I'm not sure if it was around before then. I'll have it up on the screen when it was actually introduced. And it was great. If your power cable got tugged while your MacBook was plugged in, if somebody steps on the cable and pulls it or something like that, it would just pop out. You know, it wouldn't pull the laptop along with it. Whereas on this model, that was around from around 2016 through to 2019, not only was that not a thing, you had to charge via USB-C, which would of course pull the whole laptop along with it if it got tugged. It also meant you had to sacrifice one of your 4 Thunderbolt ports to charge. Now, of course, you do get pass-through charging on USB-C, so if you're connected to a dock or a RAID drive or something like that through USB-C Thunderbolt, you are receiving some power there. But if you're using anything power-hungry, you know, like Avid Media Composer or you're transcoding in DaVinci Resolve, it's not going to be enough. You're going to need the power adapter plugged in. So although I had 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, I could only ever really use 3 at a time because I always had to be charging in one of the other ones. So I've really no idea why they ever thought it was a good idea to get rid of it. And that wasn't the only thing they got rid of. They got rid of HDMI ports, USB-A ports. In fact, on this 2018 MacBook here, all there is in the way of I/O is 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports and a headphone jack. So sorry, there's also a headphone jack. That's actually something you do need to point out these days for some reason. And while the Thunderbolt 3 spec does allow you to technically connect all kinds of peripherals with blazing fast speeds, it resulted in people having to buy a whole lot of peripherals like adapters and docks and displays that were USB-C compliant and things like that. And I'm no exception by any means. I have an external dock from OWC, a Thunderbolt 3 one, that gave me, about 5 USB Type A's, 1 USB Type C, an Ethernet port, display port, mic in and out. You know, just a lot of the important I/O that you kind of rely on a computer. And with the Thunderbolt 3 spec, I could plug in all sorts into that and have it run without issue. And it's nice, but, you know, wasn't really necessary when you see some of the Windows laptops out there and all of the I/O that they have. And that is, of course, our first noticeable point of upgrade on this machine. Now, don't get me wrong, Apple is still pushing the Thunderbolt spec, as they should. It is, you know, an incredible connector, basically allowing full PCIe externally, allowing you to connect all kinds of, external peripherals that don't have to be baked inside the machine. So here we have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, but we also have MagSafe back, and we have an HDMI 2.1 port for connecting to an external display without an adapter, and of course our headphone jack. Now the display is also significantly improved. You may be able to tell that on the M2 here it is slightly larger, and for those of you who are aware about the Apple Silicon laptops, you will be aware that there is the notch right here, which can look a little bit weird and, you know, take some getting used to when you first use it, but honestly it doesn't bother me at all. Because as you can see here, when you're in full screen mode, you don't even see it. You know, it's like that top part of the screen where the notch would be, you just don't see. And you're not losing any screen real estate based on what used to be there before, so there's nothing lost. If I bring my cursor all the way up to the top, then I get my options in the menu bar. But they've done a really, really, really good job of blending the blacks in the display with the actual black of the notch. So you can't really see that there. The one thing that I thought was weird about this is if you're moving your cursor around, it actually disappears behind the notch. You know, there's nothing in the OS to prevent that or have it bounce off. The operating system thinks there's display there. It's not accounting for the notch. And if you actually play around with your iPhone as well, it does it there too. It has the notch, but the operating system doesn't know that. So you could theoretically lose your cursor back there, but you could always just shake it to find it again and you get it back. I'm not really worried about it. It is very bright. I'll have the proper specs of it up right now. And because of the power efficiency of Apple Silicon, it can stay at that brightness for a considerable amount of time without even needing to be plugged in. In fact, the best example of the M2's power efficiency that I've seen so far is that when I have it plugged in at my desk with the RAID and the Thunderbolt dock, the little power pass-through that it gets from the USB-C of those two items is enough to power it even when it's doing Avid exports and Resolve transcodes and, you know, CPU and GPU intensive tasks without having to plug in the power adapter. So honestly, I've only actually used the power adapter once or twice in the 3 or 4 weeks that I've had the device now. It's been pretty impressive. But us filmmakers know that picture's only half the story, and luckily there's been a significant upgrade in sound too. Now, the MacBook Pro speakers aren't necessarily something that I use too much. I'll have my own speakers on my desk setup. But for watching a movie or for, you know, browsing YouTube content or playing media in general, the speakers in the new one are quite nice. So I've set these both up with Rave at full volume, so it's going to be a bit loud. And the old speakers are by no means bad. But just can get a little bit tinny and losing some bass there. Whereas the new ones, oh, and just as a little side note, something that's really cool is that because this runs on Apple Silicon and the chips are so similar to the chips that are in the iPhones and the iPad, I can now install not just Mac apps, but iPhone and iPad apps as well. Now, these aren't going to run quite as smoothly because they're designed ideally for a touchscreen, but the trackpad on the MacBook, which even a lot of Windows users and prefers like LTT will tell you is a very nice trackpad, mimics the touch interface of the, you know, iPhone or iPad display. So I can get any functionality that I have on my phone to work on my laptop, just should I need that at any point. In terms of the design between them, you'll notice that they do look fairly similar. It's that standardized, you know, Apple MacBook Pro look. But the new one, in an interesting departure for Apple, is a good bit thicker and heavier than the old one. Something I really, really like, by the way. Makes it seem a bit more professional, and I'd much rather have my phone or my laptop or anything like that be twice as thick, but be more capable of longer battery life, then it just looks sleeker. That's, you know, I want it to work and perform, especially if you're going to put Pro in the name. Right, but that's enough about tech stuff. I promised I wouldn't get bogged down in that. We're here to talk about its performance with Avid and editorial stuff. So, how does it perform with Avid? Well, great. I've noticed just about everything that I do in Avid being faster lately. You know, even from navigating the timeline to dancing between really heavy projects, opening bins and saving. It's just all snappier and quicker. Even though, as many of you may know, Avid still hasn't managed to code Media Composer to be fully native with Apple Silicon yet, though I hear that's on the cards very, very soon, since they're already there with Pro Tools. And about 80% of the work, from what I've been told, has already been done on Media Composer, so I think that's coming very quickly. But even though Avid haven't quite managed to complete their native Avid Media Composer code yet, it still runs brilliantly. I must say, Apple's emulation for Intel programs using the Rosetta 2 protocol is flawless. It's a combination of both software and hardware that allows the Apple Silicon to run Intel apps. It's mind-boggling, it's insane. But as you see, I can fly through timelines, can play them back without any issue, and renders work really, really great as well. In fact, this timeline of the Treasurer, it's got 231 unrendered effects on it, which are rendering right now just for a background screen for you to look at. But I did do it on both machines last night. And this was on performance RAID, so they're using the same connected storage. And on the M2, it was literally twice as fast, rendering the entire timeline with a sequence and timecode burning, and watermark, and a whole bunch of frame flex effects and different Avid effects work on it in about 4 minutes for the whole thing. You know, for a laptop, this performance is just really, really impressive. And again, all this is through emulation. So I'm pretty sure there's still performance being left on the table because of that. once Avid Media Composer is fully native to Apple Silicon, I reckon we're going to see another speed bump in performance, and I really can't wait to find out if I'm right in there or not. And we can see this in other applications that have managed to make the leap to being fully native to Apple Silicon yet, like DaVinci Resolve, where my transcodes from raw camera media have just gone really, really quick. And of course, your Apple apps like Compressor and Final Cut Pro, where I've just stopped using proxies altogether. And I'm leaning on Compressor a bit more now for re-encoding. I used to use Resolve, but the improved utilization of the Apple Silicon has just made Compressor a much more attractive option. I've just always liked the layout of Compressor. I like that I can create little applets that I can just drop clips onto and they'll be encoded. And I can chain lots of different encodes from a master in one go, in one task. Now this is very, very similar to Adobe Media Encoder, which I believe is also native now to Apple Silicon. Adobe were fairly quick to update their apps. They usually are, to be fair. Adobe and DaVinci are generally pretty quick in that regard. And thanks to the lovely 96 gigs of unified memory on this thing, I've been able to have Avid encodes going while looking around at footage in Resolve, and also having a bunch of tabs open in my browser and looking around there without it really breaking a sweat. It's just more RAM than I really need, but I would rather have more than not enough. At the time when I ordered this machine, 32 gigs was the most that Apple allowed you to spec it out as. Unknowingly, about 2 or 3 weeks after I purchased it, they started letting you spec it up to 64 gig for no extra cost. That was a bit of a bummer at the time, but it did serve me well, and 32 gigs is plenty for normal Avid Media Composer work. But if you've got a heavy timeline open and you're doing stuff there, I wouldn't necessarily be able to, open my browser with, like, say, 10 tabs and browse Facebook or something like that. Something's going to be hungry for RAM. Whereas with this, not really a problem. I can do as much as I like. I haven't actually managed to max it out yet, despite trying a few times by just opening lots of apps after app after app. Now, something that I should probably address at this point is that some people I've noticed have got concerns about Apple Silicon based on, the hardware's compatibility with other peripherals and devices that they might want to use. It's like, for example, this I/O output box. I'm using the Blackmagic Ultra Studio Mini monitor. There is also, of course, the Asia T-Tap and other, options for the same purpose. But while at some point there may have been issues with using these devices on Apple Silicon, I can let you know firsthand that I've not experienced any. And now the first thing that I did when I got this machine was I wiped it, I set it up as new. I didn't restore from a backup, even though I had plenty of those. Just installed every app one by one, relicensed it, as well as Blackmagic Desktop Video, the software that runs this little baby. So I was using the very latest of the desktop video software and the very latest Avid Media Composer, and I can definitely confirm that on Apple Silicon they played fine together. I'm able to get Avid out perfectly smooth, running my timeline, going to my client monitor without any issues. I have heard of some issues with users using Asia's T-Tap. I don't have one to test with myself, but I have heard more than one Avid user tell me that once they reverted to Avid 2022.7 and used the latest Asia T-Tap software, it worked fine. So it may be an Avid T-Tap, software issue rather than Apple Silicon. This was actually a big part of the reason why I waited for M2 to just sort of see, feel out all the kind of, Gen 1 issues that were appearing on these chips. I just wanted to let them break the mold. I didn't want to be an early adopter, especially since this is the machine that I'm going to be using for a lot of my primary Avid work as a first AE or an editor, especially more so these days with remote work and different stuff like that. So I kind of need it to work. I can't just have it be an experimental machine that I run the bleeding edge hardware and software on. But guys, that's kind of the summary from me. If there's any other tests or benchmarks you'd like me to run comparing these two machines, or just any questions you'd like to know about, Apple Silicon and M2 and how it performs with Avid or any other apps that you like to use, let me know in the comments below and I can run a test and let you know. This is currently the newest and top tier chip in the Apple Silicon lineup, so this would be a good one to do those tests on. But for now, I actually really need to go get packing because I've got a flight on Monday and I haven't started at all, so I will see you guys later.